Andrew, we're going to start there. Martin asks, surely the engagement of specialist designers, structural engineer, MEP, temporary works engineer, for example, is the correct way of designing projects correctly. The PD, whilst having an overall understanding, is there to coordinate the specialist designers to ensure that design complies with the current legislation. The PD may be in danger of trying to design elements where he has no specialist knowledge or training. This could severely compromise the PI for the PD. Buildings and projects are extremely complex, and the PD can only be expected to manage the designers to coordinate between themselves a design fit for purpose and meet the client brief. Thoughts?
I think you've got a position there where you're not necessarily designing it, but to serve any useful purpose, you need to know what good looks like, because you need to make a decision about whether you're happy with the solution that's put to you. And that same applies with the PD and the building regulations and the CDM. And you also have that duty to make sure the solutions that come to you are right. And there's no guarantee that those who you are managing from a CDM perspective will have the right answer. So to know broadly what good looks like, to be able to push somebody in the right direction, say, I think this is what good looks like, this is what I believe is acceptable. And if you think differently, then you need to evidence to me about why that would be, and then to be able to have a sufficient knowledge of the building regulations to carry out your own investigation as to whether what was put to you is right. It's not a passive role, PD and the CDM, is it? It's not just, well, Andrew, you're shaking your head. I'll let you say.
No, I was agreeing with you. Yeah, that's all I was shaking my head for, yeah. Mark.
No, well, I was saying you were shaking your head as though you were agreeing, but it's not a passive role. You have to actively, and you need to know the environment. And I think some of you will know a lot about the building regulations. I discovered that I knew a little bit about it. I was certainly very familiar with Part K, but as I've started reading into more of my read into the building regulations, because I studied them back in, very, very long time ago, 40 odd years ago, I've realized that I needed to know more. And a lot of what I know is my recent knowledge, things about falling off buildings, things about fire safety, are all things that I've learned in recent times. And I would urge you to just become more familiar. You decide what your level is. Your organization will say whether you need to be an expert or awareness, but you need to have an understanding.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I'm going to have to close the questions, I'm afraid, because we've got 28 and we've only got 15 minutes. So I'm going to jump into questions. Again, everyone, if you see a question you like, give it a thumbs up. John asks, I cannot find a building regulations course or path to upskill. Do you have any guidance? It would be really appreciated.
The guidance that we're currently working on is basically a guide for clients. The meaning of what is contained in Part 2A of the amended building regulations. But that's currently in production. Other than that, the aim of this webinar series is to provide guidance on or for CDM practitioners and building regulations practitioners on the meaning of the new regulations.
I think there's what we need to take away, and we've got conversations ongoing, is to help you to find the courses that might help give you the knowledge, and actually where we're not happy that those courses are available to come up with those available to APS members. I think we're aware of that. We're in a very fast moving situation, and the changes are enormous. I'm not sure the industry is quite ready for it yet, but certainly a little bit of self-study, which is what I've been doing while you make your way. So one eye on, which is why that our reference to 86770 is really important. That gives you your self-study. I need to know a little more about this. What does that look like? Well, then I'll then go out and self-study, but we'll take it away. We need to give you some information about where to find this knowledge.
Thank you so much. Dale asks, we have undertaken review of our company under PAS 8671-8670. We lack BR experience in areas such as MEP and structural. Does asking the structural engineer to complete compliance statement, asking them to advise how they have compiled with relevant requirements, satisfy the BRPD role?
We're not talking about BRPD, but no is the answer to that question. You need to have an overarching view. You need to understand what good looks like. Andrew?
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Jonathan asks, in regard to fire safety, would you not ask a fire consultant to cover off the fire safety matters being discussed?
Well, I've got experience of this one. You can rely on the fire safety consultant to a certain extent, but you have got to be aware of what their basic requirements are of the regulations, and you've got to understand what the fire consultant is doing. You've got to understand what a fire risk assessment is. You've got to understand how that relates to either a new build project or a refurbishment project. You've got to understand what is required of a building owner in relation, or commercial building owner in relation to fire safety as well. So it's a multiplicity of considerations. I've worked with quite a few fire consultants, structural engineers who act as fire consultants, and fire engineers themselves. And unless you understand what you're seeing from them, you can't really perform your duties. When you see a fire risk assessment, you have to be able to interpret that and pass it on appropriately to whoever is constructing the building.
Thank you.
The purpose of having the levels within the assessment process is to acknowledge the fact that you might not need to have the competence to be able to design it, but you need to have a level of understanding that allows you to understand the environment, broadly what the requirements are, where to look, how to understand when you read it, so that you can have a proper interaction with the specialist to say, well, just explain that to me. Okay, I'll go away and check and make sure that's all right. And we mustn't assume that the answer that comes to you will be right, because part of your role as PD under building regulations is to plan, manage and monitor to ensure compliance. And that requires you that overarching view.
Ray asks, hi, are we saying that there are two roles, PD under the CDM 2015 requirements and PD as a separate role in relation to building control, i.e. architect, for example?
Well, I mean, it's two sets of regulations. Both require the appointment of in certain circumstances, mostly always require the appointment of a principal designer. And it's been made quite clear that that can either be one organization or two organizations. The principal designer building regulations, we have a briefing note on available covering that. And basically, in order to perform that role, you have to have experience of dealing with building control. That's submitting full plans or being involved in the management of submitting full plans, going through the entire process, including sign off before occupation. And just come back to a previous question, I didn't catch all of it, but I believe it was, is there any training available on building regulations? Yes, there is. I'm aware of LABC and other organizations who do building regulation courses. What I can do is give Tommy that information and he can put it out with the responses to this webinar.
I might do. Who knows?
I think we perhaps also need to put something out on the APS website so that we can make it available to everybody. I think that's a useful thing.
Yeah, I think it needs to go with the event. Thank you. Pamela asks, 24 questions left, so brevity. Pamela asks, what Mark is essentially saying is that a PD under CDM is essentially a designer and therefore should become a PD under B regs. Many CDM PDs act independently, reviewing the input of the design team and look specifically at H&S issues, WAH, asbestos, fire evacuation services, etc. We risk losing this vital input into the extraordinarily complex bureaucracy of the BSA.
No, I haven't said that at all. I've just said you need an awareness of things where there is a crossover, and we've given you some indication where the biggest crossovers are. So it's an awareness of what the building regulations require. Certainly relating to fire safety, you need to know what good looks like. Otherwise, you can't know what good looks like in construction. Relating to structures, clear crossover requirements. It's not to say you need to be able to design a building. It's not to say all requirements of the Part A apply, but you need an awareness to know where the issues are, what the regulations require, where you might seek a check. So you're giving a piece of advice, you're having a discussion, you'd say, well, actually, if you look at this point of the building regulations, I think that tells us where we should be going on this. That's a useful part of a discussion. I'm not designing it. I just understand the building regulations, and I'm trying to influence the decision of the design team as a whole.
Thank you. James asks, given the PD role, CDM and BREGs, is written to be undertaken by the lead designer, and the REBA is setting up their own PD register, how do APS intend to promote their register as being the one to be on?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Andrew?
It's better. Yeah. It's better, Andrew. It's better.
Yeah. Yes. We're promoting the APS register to the entire industry, not just to members. We are aware of other schemes. The RIBA and CEAT. I'm familiar with the RIBA one in particular. We are taking a different view to the RIBA. The RIBA are promoting a combination of principal designer, building regulations, and principal designer CDM, and their training into that covers both topics. We don't see that as being the way to go. Our register relates purely to the principal designer building regulations. And of course, there is a requirement, as we've said in this webinar, for there to be an interface and an interlink between the two PD roles. But we are promoting our register to the industry, not just to a specific group of professionals within the industry.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Jacqueline asks, hi, if a project, not high risk, was submitted for building warrant before October last year, does the client have to appoint a PDBR under transitional procedures?
Andrew, I picked up building warrant, which made me think it was Scottish.
Building warrant is Scottish, yeah.
So it doesn't apply.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mary asks, are we saying that the industry is moving towards CDM PDs taking on the BSPD roles? That would mean quite a bit of upskilling for CDM PDs and would take quite a time to become comfortably competent. Or
I'll answer it for brevity. We're not saying that at all. We are just saying, as a PD under CDM, you need a reasonable understanding of the building regulations relating to those things that you deal with on a regular basis, which must necessarily be fire safety, be elements of structure where things might fall from the building, particularly Part K, which relates to access, which is a major part of what CDM PD might do. And there will be other bits that we haven't covered where you just need that overarching view, not to be blind to the regs, understand how they work, what they require, how you might investigate more. Andrew?
Yeah, there's another way of answering that. There is no way of upskilling to be a principal designer building regulations if you haven't been dealing with building control within a reasonable time. And we've said that in previous webinars, and we say it in our briefing note, who can be a principal designer building regulations. You must have experience of dealing with building control. It's not something that you can just go along to a training session and obtain. So it's experience. So if you want to go down that route, you would have to be part of an organization that was dealing with building control, building regulations, and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much. I understand it is 1 o'clock. Gents, are you okay to answer a few more questions? This will be separate. The webinar itself. If you're unable to get your question answered at the moment, just because there were so many, this additional video will go on a separate link. So the Q&A will be separate to the webinar. Okay, Brian asks, CDM has a route for organizational competence for PDPC. Does the BSR have a similar route for organizational competence?
That's one for you, Mark, I think.
Organizational capability is a requirement under the building regulations. And organizational capability is the management of competence. And it starts with what we've been talking about. At its core, it's saying every organization needs to work out what competencies it needs across its piece and what competence each individual role needs, and then measure people against it and then manage it so to make sure people maintain those competencies, or where remedial action is required, that obtain the necessary knowledge where they don't have it, are supervised while they gain the necessary skills or experience. So that's what organizational capability is. Are they aligned? I think they will become increasingly aligned. As I said at the beginning, I'm leading an organizational capability. I'm presenting at the BSR conference. So that will be subject to, we're talking about that in, when are we talking about it, Tommy? What's the date?
Soon.
That's very helpful.
May the 21st, I believe.
May the 21st, okay.
I believe. John, what mentions after we had that lovely session about the balconies, surely if a balcony fails, it's down to poor design or installation, not following the design detail or poor installation.
All of those things are true, but it's a case of integrated design team with competent professionals working together to prevent that outcome. And I think everybody has a part in that process. And so if your duty is to ensure under CDM that the building is safe to occupy, then you're part of that process, aren't you? You're part of that process to ensure compliance. And you might have, if you have an understanding of the building regulations, a better role to play to be part of that discussion. And certainly listening to that scheme the other day, what I talked about with the external cladding panels, it was a whole team discussion about how they will achieve panels that can be fitted safely, they can be verified they've installed safely, they can be monitored and maintained over a period of time. Lifetimes of fixings is known, defined, and compatible with other components. All of that thing is part of a group discussion with a group of professionals who all understand a little bit about what each other do. And then the PD and the CDM goes, well, I've taken part in those discussions, I've inputted in, and that's my piece. And my piece is making sure the health and safety file then reflects some of that information about what does the user then need to do to make sure that condition continues. What information do I put in the health and safety file about how that was built? It'll provide further information. I'm getting into dodgy territory talking about health and safety file now.
What are we doing? Jodie asks, this has always been a consideration, i.e. items not falling off a building and the operation and maintenance. I'm not sure what the relevance is relating to upskilling in this area.
If you understand the building regulations, you'll think, well, I don't need to learn anymore. I understand the building regulations. But if you don't, if you come from a health and safety bent, as many people have, a lot of the information you need to know about what good looks like and what compliant looks like in relationship to a design comes from the building regulations, comes from the approved documents, comes from the British standards, from that side. So you can't say, I know a lot about health and safety, therefore I don't need to know anything about building regulations. You need to be a rounded principal designer under CDM, to have that palette of knowledge. And we've now got a statutory duty for you to be able to be competent to understand the building regulations and to, as it relates to what you do, and you're a designer, and also to demonstrate to others. So you need to say, I have looked at the relevant building regulations. These are the ones that apply to me, using 8670 as a guide, as the things you need to really focus on. And then understand that, so that when you go compliant, you're not just going compliant, this is health and safety legislation, this is health and safety guidance, it's compliant with that. You go, but I also know that when I'm making a suggestion or pushing or having a discussion, I also know what the building regulations relate, and they interrelate. They should cross over.
Paviter asks, please can you expand competency as an organisation? Will this need additional checks on the individuals within organisations?
Organizational capability is the management of competence, and every organization that's working as the designer or contractor in the built environment will necessarily have some degree of duty relating to the building regulations. And they need to manage competence. So they've got so whatever it is they choose to do to work on this type of building or that type of building, discharge this type of role or that type of role, they have enough people of the right competencies to deliver to whatever they want to do. And each person within that organization needs to be competent to fulfill their role. And yes, you need to do both those pieces. Is what are the competencies we need as an organization? How many people in the various roles, and how many people at different levels to manage the whole? And then to look at every single role you have and say, these are the competencies. Do the people fulfilling those roles match that requirement? If they don't, what do we do to change it? That's managing competence. And it is a statutory duty in relationship to the building regulations, and probably an implied duty. Is it implied or statutory duty relating to CDM, Andrew?
Sorry, I was reading another question as it was coming up, Mark. So
I haven't got that thing.
My apologies.
Yeah.
I'll answer it now. Clive said a 10-storey office block has recently been converted to residential units on all floors. Does this recently repurposed building have to be registered with the BSR in order to receive building control sign-off?
I'm not going to go to that question because it's too far off to the left field. Put it into the general one.
No worries. Duncan says, if a statutory authority has permitted development rights, does this negate building regulations compliance requirements?
Not really relating to what we're talking about today, so I'll park that for another day.
Yeah, everyone, if you're going to put questions in within the first 5 minutes without watching the content, they probably will get ignored. So I'm going to go to the most upvoted ones. So Kevin said, there must be a balance to what you need to demonstrate from a competence perspective as a CDM PD. Presumably, this is more relevant for the PD under BSA.
There is a balance, which is why I put in that reference in evaluating is the levels. The levels are really significant. The levels can be anything from an awareness or to a detailed understanding. And I'm sorry, in an hour, I was aware as I was speaking, I wish I had more time to delve into some of this, but you may only need an awareness in certain areas, but you still need that an awareness. And it's down to you to identify, relating to the role, whether you need that awareness. Now, whether that's reading through the regs once or going on a full building regulations course, that will depend on what you're doing and how you relate, how it works with your role within the organization. Sole practitioners probably need a lot more knowledge because you are your own checks and balances. Larger organization may have somebody who provides a lot of that detail, and you can go and seek advice off them. That's what organizational capability is. Where do you need the skills? What level of skills do you need relating to that?
Lawrence says, to have two PDs working on a project cannot be good for clarity and communication. Wouldn't all PDs be competent in all areas and deliver... But that was shouldn't. Shouldn't all PDs be competent in all areas and deliver the role of the principal designer, which covers all of the aspects?
We've been through this so many times. The policy intent of the BSR is that there is one PD organisation, and within it has has people with the various competencies, be that fast AD, PD under CDM, PD under building regulations specialist, as an organization to deliver that. But the law doesn't require it, and there will be many circumstances where there will be two PDs, one under building regulations and one under CDM, which sort of loops back to why it is important for a PD under CDM to have an understanding of the building regulations. So when you're having a conversation, you're conversing on like minds, and you're not battling somebody under CDM under the building regulations saying, well, I don't agree with you, without understanding that they're probably fighting their corner because they have an understanding of the building regulations and you have a knowledge of health and safety. So that combined knowledge allows a discussion saying, well, I'm not going to suggest something because I know that that's problematic in relationship to comply with the building regulations. That's all we're saying, really, is have enough knowledge so that you can have conversations with other members of the design team and understanding the constraints they're working under when you're trying to put forward your position.
Understood. Fran makes a lovely comment. Interviewing for new team members, she looks for some of their competence. There seems to be a real gap in basic CDM knowledge in some candidates before we start looking for BSA knowledge. It makes her wonder how people could easily measure and demonstrate their skill sets. Will the APS be adding to their PD BSA register to allow registered CDM consultants to use the register to demonstrate baseline competence?
I think I covered that and when I went over very briefly what APS is planning to do.
I think you did.
There is obviously we're about to launch a PD building regulations register, and we are looking at how we might do something in parallel in relation to CDM, principal designers. It's on the agenda, but it's that's all I can say about that at the moment.
We have a fantastic group of staff working their socks off to get things out, and I, as president, want them to do it all now, tomorrow. But I'm aware that that's not possible.
No comment. John says he asked the question earlier on, but he used the word warranty. So I think we kind of dismissed it from Scottish. So from an English perspective, if a project not high risk was submitted for building warrant before October last year, does the client have to appoint a BDBR under transitional procedures?
Well, transitional procedures have now ended.
Yeah.
And there were a series of conditions which we have reported on where, depending on what happened at the submission of full plans, whether or not they're approved or rejected by the building control body, would determine how the project application would be dealt with and whether or not appointments would be made. It's rather there's a whole series of different scenarios that possibly we can communicate separately with John on if John requires some more detail. The best way of getting that information is to send me an email.
Fantastic. So we're going to try and do some quick fire ones. I've tried to leave all the one line questions to the end. Christopher asks, has 8670 replaced PAS 91 and SSIP?
Oh, no, I can answer that. No, I shouldn't say what I've got meetings about. 8670 is the overarching. Even PAS 91 deals with health and safety, broadly speaking. 8670 looks at more building safety, which is building regulations and occupied management of occupied high-risk buildings. There is a crossover. Common assessment standard, I am aware that Build UK are looking at how they are going to address both in a revised common assessment standard, which will deal with both building regulations piece, which of course they will map against 8670 1 and 2, depending to what role it is. So they are doing something at the minute, and I will know a bit more about it tomorrow, exactly what they're doing.
Thank you so much. Gavin asks, when will APS be rolling out their scheme to register as a competent BRPD with you?
Yeah, it's being lined up to be released as soon as we can. What we're doing at the moment is we are assessing the assessors, if you like. We've got a group of assessors that are going through the application process, and we're currently behind the scenes. Carol is working with our IT people to enable the background functionality that we need in order to process the applications. We had hoped to be launching round about now. We had a discussion earlier today, and it looks as if it will be in a few weeks' time.
Wonderful. Just as a reminder to everyone, we're just going to go through the last 8 questions now. This Q&A will be separate to the main webinar, and you'll be able to watch it back. So don't worry if your question hasn't been answered yet. Ray asks, hi, do you foresee it is going to take some time for people in the industry to develop further skills if you are asking PD to take on board the further increased building regs, unless there is going to be 2 rules?
The upskilling of the industry, and we stand here talking to people who are engaged in the process, and I also have conversations with, I often use my next door neighbour in Devon as an example, a fantastic builder, but way away from any information that would tell him about what's changed in the world and what he needs to upskill. So we're talking about minimum of 5 years to upskill the industry, but they're talking about the culture change that's required. It's a 20 or 30 year project. You know, this is massive, and so you are those who are interested and those who are up front and started to look, but getting this out through all tiers of the industry is an enormous project.
Timothy asks, when is a building, i.e. when does a building come under building regs?
Well, the definition of that is in the building regulations. So
that would be the first answer. I think I've come to enough of these webinars to know what a building is at this point. Paviter asks, has industry created checklists that allow deploy BSI Flex from an organisation and individual basis?
The organisational capability standard coming out of the Building Safety Alliance both describes the system that needs to be in place, but also describes the process which you need to follow to apply any one of the standards. So you take that process to measure organizational capability, which is to a degree what we've talked about today, measuring. We just talked about it relating to an individual, but there's a wider piece of how you manage it across the organization. And you take that process and then you say, what standard applies to us? Well, we want to be a PD under building regulations 8671. I take that, I apply it, and then I assess it, which is what APS are doing relating to the building register. If it relates to CDM, you go 8670, which is again what APS will be doing in the future. If you're principal contractor, 8673, you take those standards and apply it to what you do, and then consider what you need to know across the organization. So there is a standard that will help you get there, and it'll be out in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Alan asks, does a client who appoints an architect / M&E designers legally required to undertake a competence assessment?
Well, it doesn't specifically require them to undertake a competency assessment. The wording is slightly different, but the wording in the Part 2A of the regulations does say that the client has to undertake or appoint people that they are reasonably satisfied are competent to undertake the task. And I suppose it's a subtle difference in the wording. They're not required to follow a particular format.
I was reading, sad that I am, the BSR's guidance on competence yesterday, and they actually say it's not the easiest document to read because it seems to change position as you read through it. But one thing it says clearly is we will be using the PAS standards as the benchmark.
Thank you.
Compliance with a PAS standard is the standard. They will say, well, do you meet that standard? Is the first question that they'll ask you.
Thank you. Pavita asks, made a comment actually. I would challenge that the BSI Flex is a requirement for CDM 2015, as it is not specifically within the regulations. Clients have not included this within their scope.
Right, the BSI Flex impacts on APS by suggesting a framework for our own competency assessment of applicants for membership at IMAPS and CMAPS. And that's the relationship between CDM practice and the Flex, soon to be a British standard.
Thank you. Last two questions, gents. We made it. Sean asks, the UK Engineering Council have the UK spec and newer UK spec high-risk buildings, HRB, that organisations can use to accredit EngTech, IEng and CEng status. Is this something that APS are looking to use or apply?
I'm aware of that, and we will certainly refer to these documents.
Thank you so much. And I think we've got a lovely comment at the end. Timothy Clark, very interesting. Prior to this, I would have anticipated today's seminar content mostly applying to the PDBR role rather than PDCDM. I now think a great amount is applicable to both. Thank you so much, Timothy, for that. Okay, that's the end, everyone. Thank you ever so much.